Now, in Syria, ever since the death of Iranian Quds Force commander General Qasem Soleimani at the beginning of January 2020, we've seen certain roles are starting to evolve in Syria, particularly. I feel that Iran's influence in Syria and in the Middle East as a whole, since the death of Soleimani, has actually been capped. As in, under Soleimani, they were enjoying many victories. Their influence was spreading all over the region. They seemed to be on the verge of creating a corridor from Iran through the Middle East into the Mediterranean, which would have established Iran as a superpower in the region. But since the death of Soleimani, they've not been able to continue that momentum. And that's actually, I believe, that was the intention, actually, of the US assassination of the Iranian general at the beginning of January, to back Iran, to make Iran back down, and to make it start behaving itself. And I spoke more about that issue in last month's podcast. But at the same time, Iranian proxies in Syria, that they enjoy Iranian support, but they're not under direct Iranian control, such as Hezbollah. They also have not been able to utilize their resources in Syria to the extent that they might like, to the maximum extent. And that's also because of domestic issues that Hezbollah is facing in its native country of Lebanon. Political issues, which I will be speaking about later. Now, that's regarding Iran. Now, when it comes to the Syrian opposition, we're seeing a slight shift as well there. Now, the Syrian opposition in the past, in the early days of the Syrian civil conflict, was seen as being very close to Turkey. It was also enjoying support from other countries as well, namely Saudi Arabia. But in the past couple of months, there has been a shift within the political Syrian opposition, in that those opposition figures who are seen as being close to Turkey are being pushed down the ladder, whereas opposition figures who are seen as closer to Saudi Arabia are being pushed up. Now, there's one particular member of the Syrian opposition who we need to look out for. His name is Nibras al-Fadl. This is a very interesting person to look out for, because Nibras al-Fadl, actually, he's not truly a member of the Syrian opposition. This man was once an advisor to Bashar al Assad, and he is also, very interestingly, he's also an Alawite. He belongs to the same religious sect as President Bashar al Assad. But since December, with Saudi Arabian support, he has been able to enter the High Negotiations Committee, and there are many rumors actually that he may be pushed to take on the leadership of the High Negotiations Committee, which is the main faction, Syrian opposition faction. Now, when it comes to regime leader Bashar al Assad, he also seems to be turning more to his Baathist roots as an Arab socialist. Now, throughout the majority of the Syrian civil conflict, the main narrative that was in existence was, at least among the Syrian opposition, was that the Syrian opposition was mainly Sunni Muslim by identity, Sunni Muslim Arab, but Sunni Muslim first, above everything else. And Assad was being portrayed as an Alawite, which is a sect of Shia Islam, an ideology that Iran propagates. He was seen as a puppet of Iran. Obviously, Iran not being an Arab country as well, made Assad seem like a foreign agent in a way. Now, what Assad has done by reaching out recently to the Eastern government in Libya and making an alliance with Khalifa Haftar's forces, Assad is trying to show himself more as an Arab leader. He's balancing out the Iranian support that he's getting with Arab support, and Khalifa Haftar is allowing Assad to do that because, despite what other Arab nations may think of Assad, Khalifa Haftar is somebody that Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt particularly are supporting, these key Arab countries. Now, with Assad also facing assaults from Turkey in northwestern Syria, as well as Israeli airstrikes, these actions by Turkey and Israel are reinforcing Assad, his image as an Arab leader who is facing non-Arab aggression. So it's doing well for his image politically, and is enabling people to forget about the atrocities that he and his regime have committed throughout the years of the Syrian civil conflict, which has killed hundreds of thousands of people. But it's very clear now that Assad has won the war, and Assad is going to remain in power. And other countries are looking for a way to continue working with Syria, whether they like it or not, with Assad in power. So there is an attempt on behalf of those who are keen to continue working with Syria under these conditions to redeem Assad, to redeem his image, so that they don't look bad by working with him and cooperating with him. So Assad, despite being an Alawite, he is no longer seen as an Alawite leader or as an Iranian agent. He is now starting to go back to his Baathist roots, to be seen as a secular Arab socialist leader. And he has all of the ingredients in place in order to make that remedy for his image work. Now, when it comes to the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is mainly comprised of the YPG, pro-PKK Kurdish fighters, their image and their allegiances in Syria is also changing. Now, the Syrian Kurds, or pro-PKK Kurds in general, throughout history, being that they are actually left-wing, they are actually Marxist-Leninists originally, they were seen as being very close to Russia, to the Soviet Union. We're talking about the 70s, the 80s, early 90s. And Russia being, the Soviet Union rather, in those days, during the Cold War days, being seen as the biggest threat. Anything that was left-wing, that was emerging in the Middle East or anywhere in the world, was seen as a threat by the West. So any country that was fighting against that, in this case Turkey, would have been given the full support of NATO and the West in order to make sure that doesn't spread, those rebellions don't spread. However, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the PKK and its offshoots such as YPG, they've kind of also undergone a transition in their approach to politics. In the past, their hardcore, staunch left-wing ideology was not gaining them a lot of support from Kurdish people in general, because Kurdish people in general, first of all, they are actually quite conservative. They are Muslim. So the version of communism, atheist communism, that they were preaching, that they were supporting back in those days, was not appealing really to the Kurdish masses. But now the YPG, not only to just gain the support of foreign powers, YPG, PKK, so many abbreviations for these groups, but they're all really working as one. In order to gain support of the foreign powers, in order to boost their public image, and to gain the support of the Kurdish people, they have been presenting themselves as a more democratic force. And to a certain extent, that did work in Syria, in that they got the US to support them in Syria to fight against ISIS. Now, the US having helped the YPG, STF, whatever you want to call them, having helped them secure most of eastern Syria, east of the Euphrates, especially the areas where all of Syria's oil fields are, then having seen that the US pulled out of Syria and left the YPG to fend for themselves, the YPG, in the face of Turkish assaults on territories to their north that they control, they started turning towards their traditional ally, Russia, for support. They've never actually been anti-Russian, despite enjoying the support of the US. And I think that's actually one of the main reasons why the US might have actually pulled out of Syria, because they realized that despite all of the support that they've given to the SDF and to the YPG, despite all of that, and despite risking so much in regards to their relations with Turkey for the sake of these people, that these people still have not cut off their spiritual affiliation to Russia. And to see that immediately, as soon as the US pulled out of Syria, this group, the SDF YPG, turned towards the Assad regime, which is obviously another element that the US is trying to suppress in the Middle East. For the US to see this basically shows that the YPG, SDF, PKK, whatever you want to call them, have always had their own agenda. So now we're seeing that the YPG, SDF, PKK are siding more with Assad, Bashar al Assad, in order to consolidate Syria as a socialist country in which minorities such as the Kurds will have more of a say and will be boosted in seeing that the Sunni Muslim majority, the Arabs of Syria, are suppressed. So we're seeing Assad turn back to his Baathist roots, and we're also seeing the Syrian Kurds turning towards Assad. But there will be a slight change to the Baathism that Assad stood for before the war and the Baathism that Assad stands for now, in that Assad was an Arab socialist. That's what Baathist basically means. Now he may have to just accept that he is a socialist without the Arab elements involved, because under the previous Baathism that existed in Syria before the civil war broke out, the Syrian Kurds, we're talking about 200,000 people, were not even offered Syrian citizenship because they were treated as foreigners. But now, having succeeded in controlling half of the country east of the Euphrates, the Kurds are in a position where they can demand rights and actually get those rights from the Assad regime. So in a way, Syria, in order to continue with Assad, in order to continue on this path of socialism, it may have to tone down the Arab element of Baathism and promote itself more as a socialist country for all groups, particularly minority groups, provided that all of them are united in suppressing the majority Sunni Muslim people of Syria in order to maintain this identity. And among those minority groups is the Orthodox Christian minority in Syria. Now they are not in a position of strength in order to start asserting themselves politically. But with the Sunni Muslim element of Syria being suppressed, and with the minorities working together, united, and boosting each other up in order to maintain some kind of monopoly over Syria as a state. With this happening, the Orthodox community will definitely enjoy being boosted by Russia, which I mentioned earlier is seeing itself as a third Rome, which is seeking to consolidate Orthodox proxies and power and allegiances in the Middle East. And actually, if you ask me, Russia would prefer to work more with another party in Syria besides Assad's Baathists, and this is a minority party in Syria, a small party, but at the same time a very old party and a very influential party, which I can see growing in power in the coming decades, and they are called the Syrian Socialist Nationalist Party, SSNP. Many referring to their logo, which looks almost like a swastika, refer to them as a Nazi party. Obviously, the party would deny their allegiance to the Nazis, but one thing that this party does propagate is a greater Syria, a Syria based upon its traditional borders, if theological borders, let's say. And these borders extend to include countries like Lebanon. It extends to include the southeastern Turkish province of Hatay, and it extends to include the island of Cyprus, believe it or not. And actually, one commentary I can make about this party propagating the expansion of Syria into these areas is that this party was originally set up by Orthodox Syrians, Christian Orthodox Syrians, and by spreading into these territories where Eastern Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, has a long history and has and still has populations, it would boost their role in Syria as a state, being that the majority of Cyprus, for example, is Orthodox Christian. In Hatay, in the ancient city of Antakya, it's a headquarters for the Orthodox Church, and Lebanon has many Maronites and other Christian minorities, including Orthodox. So the SSNP, the Syrian Socialist Nationalist Party, is, I believe, Russia's preferred ally in Syria, and I believe that they will take on a greater role in the future as a party. However, for the time being that they are not in the position to start taking direct control and assert themselves more directly, we might see the regime of Bashar al Assad start pivoting more towards those who would typically vote for such a party. We may see some kind of merger, some kind of coalition, some kind of alliance between the Baathists and the SSNP, as well as with the YPG. So we can see Syria in a way transitioning away from its Arab identity into a more Syrian, more inclusive Syrian socialist identity under Bashar al Assad in the future.